There is one thing a manipulative person will never admit out loud. One thing they will spend their entire life hiding behind: charm, behind explosive rage, behind complete silence, and behind tears that only show up when it is convenient for them. Here's the raw truth. The manipulator is not afraid of your anger. They are not afraid of your tears. They are not afraid of your empty threats to walk away. They have already survived all of that 100 times before. So what actually rattles them? What truly shakes the dark foundation inside their mind is the exact moment you stop reacting. The moment you finally see them clearly, the moment your eyes stop begging for answers and start calmly watching them. Because in that instant, something they have depended on for years completely collapses. The illusion cracks, and whatever pattern of manipulation, control, and quiet domination has been feeding off you suddenly realizes it is staring at someone it can no longer feed on. That is the moment the manipulator starts behaving in strange and very specific ways. And once you learn to spot those patterns, you will finally understand something most people never figure out in their entire lives. The manipulator was never the powerful one. You were. They just made sure you never discovered that. Before we go any further, do something for yourself. If you have ever been emotionally drained by someone who claimed they loved you, tap follow on this channel right now. Not for me, but for you. Because what comes next may change the way you see every manipulator you have ever known. Stay with me. This is where the real shift begins. Most people never realize that manipulators do not run on love or logic or even hate. They run on control. Control is their oxygen. Control is the only thing that quiets the deep emptiness gnawing inside them. And the way they get that control is by studying you quietly. They study your fears, your hopes, your old wounds, your loneliness, and your deep need to be understood. Then they position themselves as the ultimate answer to everything you have ever felt was missing. That is why the bond felt almost magical at the start. It was not love, it was reconnaissance. They were quietly mapping your soul so they could later use it against you. And the moment you start to heal, the moment you start to remember who you really are, that map becomes completely useless and their grip starts to die. That is when their behavior begins to shift in ways that can feel almost strange to watch. Pay close attention here because this next part changes everything. When a manipulator senses their grip on you is loosening, they do not respond with self-reflection. They respond with panic, dressed up as dominance. They suddenly turn cold or suddenly turn overly sweet. They pull away without any explanation, or they flood you with attention you never even asked for. They spark arguments over nothing. They bring up old wounds you thought were buried. They accuse you of things you never did. They rewrite history right in front of you, expecting you to flinch, to doubt yourself, and to fold back into the small shape they once carved out for you. And when you do not fold, when you stay completely still, when your eyes stay calm, something inside them begins to unravel, because their entire identity depends on your reaction. Without your reaction, in a way, they quietly stop existing. This is the part nobody talks about out loud. The manipulator is not actually a strong person pretending to be weak. The manipulator is a deeply frightened person pretending to be a god. Underneath all the arrogance, the cruelty, and the cold distance, there is a child who never learned how to feel safe inside their own skin. That is why they need to dominate. That is why they need to humiliate. That is why they need to be admired, feared, obeyed, and never questioned. And when someone like you, someone who has done the deep inner work, someone who has started to genuinely value themselves, walks into their world and refuses to bow down, they feel something close to pure existential horror. Because for the very first time, they are forced to feel the exact thing they have spent their entire life running from: their own emptiness, their own smallness, and their own deep shame. Watch carefully, because what happens next tells you everything you need to know. The first clear sign that a manipulator is losing their grip on you is sudden, irrational rage. Not anger that makes sense. rage that erupts out of nowhere, wildly out of proportion, and often aimed at something tiny. A simple tone of voice, a slightly delayed reply, a small boundary you set gently, or a moment you did not laugh at their forced joke. That rage was never really about what you did, it was about what you refused to give them. You did not give them fear. You did not give them submission. You did not give them the emotional fuel they were used to pulling from you. So they escalate, because in their twisted mind, if charm no longer works, then intimidation must. And if intimidation stops working too, then destruction will. Do not look away. This next sign is even more revealing. The second sign is sudden withdrawal, the cold shoulder, the silent treatment, the disappearing act, or the blank stare across the room. To someone untrained in this world, it looks like pure indifference. But what is actually happening inside them is the absolute opposite of calm. They are punishing you quietly. They are trying to make you feel invisible, abandoned, and desperate. They are testing whether that old wound inside you, the wound of not feeling loved, not feeling chosen, and not feeling like enough, is still strong enough to drag you back to them on your knees. And if you stay grounded, if you do not chase them, if you do not break the silence first, you have just done something a manipulator cannot tolerate. You have shown them that their absence does not destroy you. And that is a wound to their fragile ego that they will carry for a very long time. But here is where it slips into something even darker. The third sign is blame shifting that turns almost theatrical. Suddenly, every single problem in the relationship becomes your fault. Every cruel word that came out of their mouth happened because you provoked it somehow. Every lie they told was your fault because you did not trust them enough. Every quiet betrayal happened because you did not love them the right way. This is not really an argument anymore. This is a psychological operation. They are trying to reinstall the old software of guilt, shame, and self-doubt back into your mind, because without that old software running quietly in the background, you become completely unreachable. You become unbreakable. You become free. And freedom in someone they used to control is the one thing they cannot allow to exist in peace. If this is hitting home for you, keep listening, because the next sign is the one most people completely miss. The fourth sign is the smear campaign. When every attempt at quiet internal manipulation fails, the manipulator turns outward. They start talking about you to friends, to family, to coworkers, and sometimes even to your own children. They paint you as crazy, unstable, cold, selfish, and ungrateful. They flip the story so cleanly that even people who have known you for years start looking at you with quiet confusion. And here is what most survivors never fully understand. The smear campaign is not really an attack on your reputation. It is a desperate attempt to rebuild the cage. Because if they can convince the world that you are the problem, then maybe, just maybe, they can convince you of that too. The smear campaign is really nothing more than the desperate roar of a predator who has lost its prey. Most people never realize that emotional independence is the single most threatening force in a manipulator's entire life. Not money, not status, not even the threat of you walking away. It is emotional independence. The moment you stop needing their approval, their validation, their attention, or their permission to feel okay about yourself, you have effectively cut the very cord they were feeding through. And a manipulator without a feeding source becomes a deeply unstable creature. That is exactly why they get more aggressive, not less, when you begin to heal. Because in their mind, your healing is their starvation. Your quiet peace is their famine. Your self-respect is their personal exile. They do not want you well. They want you dependent. They want you reactive. The healthier you become, the more dangerous you become to the version of you they built inside their own head. Pay close attention here, because this part changes everything all over again. Boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are mirrors. And a manipulator cannot stand mirrors. Every single time you set a boundary, no matter how gently you say it, you force them to see themselves clearly for one painful second. You force them to face the fact that you have a self, a soul, a center that exists outside of them and was never theirs to command in the first place. That is unbearable for them because in their internal world, you were never really a separate person. You existed only as a function of fuel, of admiration, and of emotional regulation for them. And when that quiet function suddenly says no, when that function starts having a life of its own, they feel something close to a betrayal of massive proportions. That is the real reason they react to boundaries the exact same way most people react to actual physical violence. Because to them, your calm refusal to comply feels exactly like violence. Your refusal is the complete destruction of their little universe. Now, here is the part nobody ever talks about honestly. Underneath every single manipulative behavior, underneath every casual insult, every silent treatment, every guilt trip, every single lie, every smear campaign, and every sudden burst of rage, there is one single emotion sitting quietly at the very root of it all: fear. They are afraid constantly and always. Underneath the confident mask they present to the world, they live in a state of ongoing psychological dread. They dread being exposed. They dread being truly seen for who they actually are. They dread being ordinary. They dread being abandoned. They dread realizing that the self they built is completely hollow inside. And the only way they know how to manage that quiet dread is to push it outward, to force someone else to carry that heavy burden for them. That someone for years was you. And the real reason your healing terrifies them so much is because the moment you quietly put down the fear they handed you, they have no choice left but to feel it themselves. And they would rather destroy you completely than sit with that feeling for even a single second. What happens next reveals the ultimate truth. Once you truly understand all of this, you start to see every single behavior in a completely new light. The sudden rage is not strength. It is pure panic wearing a costume. The cold silence is not quiet power. It is a punishment born out of extreme fear. The blame shifting is not confidence. It is a desperate attempt to keep the mask glued tightly to their face. The smear campaign is not real influence over others. It is simply the loud sound of someone losing their grip on reality completely. Suddenly, the terrifying giant you were once so afraid of starts to look like exactly what they always were. A deeply frightened person screaming from inside an elaborate costume. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. Once you cannot unsee it, you can no longer be controlled by it. But here is where the truth gets even darker and more important. The manipulator's deepest fear is not actually you walking away forever. It is you becoming someone they can no longer recognize. Because the version of you they pretended to love was the version that desperately needed them. The version that doubted its own quiet intuition. The version that apologized far too quickly. The version that gave too much of itself, forgave too easily, and stayed far too long. When you transform into someone who genuinely knows their own true worth, someone who walks calmly through life, speaks clearly, sets firm boundaries without feeling guilt, and actively chooses peaceful silence over endless chaos, that new person becomes a complete stranger to them. And total strangers cannot be manipulated with old emotional wounds because those old wounds belong to older versions of you. The new you has completely rewritten the rules of engagement, and they simply cannot read the new language you are quietly speaking. This is precisely why your healing is the single greatest threat they will ever face. Not your revenge, not exposing them to the world, not even your physical abandonment. It is your quiet healing. Because revenge can be twisted into a dramatic story about your cruelty. Exposure can be reframed to others as your ongoing bitterness. Abandonment can be quietly rewritten in their mind as their own sudden freedom from you. But real healing cannot be touched. Healing cannot be spun into a clever lie. Healing cannot be argued with inside any courtroom. A healed person is like a sealed door. A healed person does not engage, does not chase after them, does not beg for answers, does not constantly explain themselves, and does not perform for anyone at all. A healed person simply lives their quiet life. And in that quiet daily living, they see something they can never have and can never become. Nothing in this world haunts them more than watching the very person they tried to quietly destroy walk calmly into a life of real peace that they themselves are entirely incapable of building on their own. Pay close attention here because this last part changes absolutely everything. Quiet self-respect is the most quiet, most devastating weapon you will ever own in your entire life. Not loud or aggressive self-respect, but quiet, internal, deeply rooted self-respect. The particular kind that does not need to be announced to the whole room. The kind that simply will not bend for anyone ever again. When you truly respect yourself, manipulation has absolutely no available surface left to grip onto. Guilt trips slide right off your back like water on glass. Gaslighting fails to enter your mind because you trust your own quiet perception far more than their distorted version of reality. Flattery no longer moves you because your sense of self-worth no longer needs to be borrowed from someone else's superficial words. Threats no longer shake your core because you have already lost the fear of losing what was actively hurting you in the first place. Quiet self-respect makes you completely unreachable in all the emotional places they used to walk freely. And here is what no one ever told you along the long way. You were never weak for being manipulated in the first place. You were simply open. You were trusting. You were being genuinely loving inside a world that quietly taught you to expect love in return. They did not target you because you were broken or flawed in some secret way. They targeted you because you were luminous, because you possessed something bright that they could never generate entirely on their own. Warmth, depth, authentic empathy, real loyalty, and a soul that could actually feel deeply without armor. They walked into your life not to gently give, but to quietly take, because they could never create from within what you already were on your own. And the exact quiet day you truly understand this reality, the day you stop seeing yourself as a victim of their cleverness and start seeing yourself as the ultimate source of the very light they were trying so hard to steal from you. Something deep inside you shifts permanently, and nothing they do will ever be able to shift it back.